Have you ever started learning a language with a huge boost of motivation, only to see that motivation disappear within months, weeks, or even days? I have, and even after dedicating 30 years of my life to language learning, I'm well aware how dangerous a lack of motivation can be for any language goal, great or small. I've seen it in my students as well. In a decade of working as a language coach, I've heard hundreds of stories about how motivation can dry up just when you need it most. If that's happened to you, then I have good news. That doesn't have to be how your language learning story ends. With the right strategies, you can develop your capacity to create motivation on demand, so you have enough for every leg of your journey towards fluency. And today, I'm going to teach you those strategies. Hello, I'm Luca Lampariello. I'm a language coach who speaks 14 languages. And on this channel, I help people learn foreign languages more efficiently, faster, and in a fun way. Let's dive right in. Whether or not you're trying to learn a language before, I'm sure it's obvious to you that language learning requires effort. What's perhaps not so obvious to people is how long they have to wait until they see some kind of reward. People who have taken language classes in school might have never seen a reward for their learning efforts. They just remember having to fill in verb tables, do endless grammar drills, and copy vocabulary list after vocabulary list. There's little to no fun in any of this, so motivation is scarce. Even independent learners who usually avoid some of the most boring staples of traditional language learning often find themselves caught in an initial stage where they spend more time with their head in language books than they do actually using the language in a productive way. Since these learners have some choice in what and how they learn, they usually find the period more motivating, this specific period more motivating than traditional learners do. But many people still get stuck at this stage. I've learned all of my languages independently, and yet this sit and study period is not at all what motivates me to keep learning languages. In reality, the most motivating part of the language learning process is typically what comes after this period, when I know enough language to actually use it in real life. When my sit and study period comes to an end is exactly when I start living the language. And this is when I do all sorts of fun and exciting things. For example, having conversations with native speakers, reading target language books, watching target language TV and movies, traveling in the country or countries where the target language is spoken, and so much more. And to me, these are the most life-changing parts of learning any language, and exactly what I look forward to when I start out as a beginner. But if you've never reached this stage, or you haven't reached it just yet in the language you're currently learning, how can you develop and maintain enough motivation to get you there? How can you stay motivated enough during the sit and study stage to eventually see the fruits of all of your efforts and of your language learning labor, so to speak? I personally use 4 powerful motivation strategies, which I will show you in detail just right now. First, imagine your way to fluency. If you know your why, you will discover your how. In a nutshell, this quote explains exactly what has allowed me to learn 13 foreign languages. And for each language I've learned, I worked hard to discover exactly why I needed to learn that language and make it a key part of my life. If you want to learn your target language well, you'll need to find your why as well. But knowing your why is not an automatic recipe for fluency. Oftentimes, a certain why is completely inaccessible at the beginner level of learning a language. So you need to take an extra step to borrow motivation from that why until you can actually make it a reality. For example, a common why of mine for language learning is to build deep connections with native speakers in their own language. When I'm a beginner who cannot string 2 words together in a language, making such deep connection is just impossible. To bridge the gap between a beginner me and the version of myself who can actually achieve that purpose, I use the power of my own imagination. Specifically, I close my eyes and visualize myself months or years in the future, after I've gotten past the sit and study phase and I'm comfortable enough to live my life in the target language. In my mind's eye, I watch myself as I make friends using the language and smile, laugh, and have fun alongside native speakers. I may even picture myself traveling within the country or visiting famous landmarks with new friends. This is exactly what I do with every new language I learn. To this day, I can even remember the images I conjured up years ago when learning German, before I had even ever set foot in Germany. Images that I thought of every day before sitting down and, hitting the books. The funny thing is that now, even after I've reached fluency in German and spent lots of time in Germany, I still find those images to be immensely motivating. Here's how you can use your why to build a powerful visualization that can fuel your motivation for years. First of all, you need to find your why. Think about the kinds of things you want to do when you are a skilled user of your target language. For me, it's usually traveling, making friends, but for you, it may be different. Find a quiet, distraction-free place and sit down with a pen and paper. Take a moment to close your eyes and try to mentally picture yourself doing all of those things you listed as part of your why and the last step. Try to flesh out the mental picture as much as possible and ask yourself questions like, who am I with? What am I doing? Where am I doing this and what? And once your visualization is sufficiently vivid, write down a description of it in words. It can be as long as you'd like, but mine is generally around 200, 350 words. Keep your written visualization with you, or at least near your study place. And before you sit down to learn each day, read what you've written and try to picture it again in your mind. If you complete the steps, you'll have a powerful source of motivation that will pull you into your desired future. You may even find that one day your visualization will come true, as many of mine have. 2. Focus on systems rather than goals. Most beginner language learners are consistently stuck asking themselves one question over and over and over again. When am I going to finally become fluent in my target language? I understand why this is. Heck, I used to be exactly the same way. Just like on any language journey or any journey in general, it's easy to find yourself wondering, are we there just yet? Over my decades of language learning, however, I've learned that these kinds of goal-based questions are not useful. It's impossible to say exactly when any language learner will definitely reach fluency, so obsessing about it will not do anyone any good. Instead of goal-based questions, I found that it's much better to ask system-based questions. While goal-based questions have answers that are often either difficult or impossible to know, system-based questions have useful answers that you can actually come up with on the spot for immediate impact. Good system-based questions for language learners include, for example, questions such as, when can I next sit down to learn my target language? How long can I dedicate to my language learning today? How can I make it easier to start my next learning session? What can I do the next time I don't feel motivated to sit down and learn? All or most of these system-based questions have answers that are repeatable. For example, if you know how long you can dedicate to your language learning today, you'll likely be able to determine how long you can dedicate to your language learning tomorrow as well. At the very least, the question helps you brainstorm about how much time you can dedicate to your language learning in the very near future, which creates value in the here and now, unlike goal-based questions. Over time, asking yourself system-based questions will help you create reliable systems and schedules that will lead you towards any goal. For example, if you develop a system through which you spend 30 to 45 minutes every day learning your target language, then you'll eventually become fluent, even if you never actually worry about when you will get there. Here are some suggestions that can help you build powerful systems for your own learning. Set aside a weekly block of time that is completely separate from your learning time. This will help your planned session, which you will use to reflect on your language learning efforts from the previous week, and ask yourself system-based questions that will improve the efficiency of your language learning for the coming week. Try to identify the strengths and weaknesses of your current learning plan and use that information to modify your plan for the future. Devote a realistic chunk of time to language learning every single day. Other than planning, the next system you will need involves actually sitting down and learn. Decide on a length of time you can spend each day in learning and mark it on your schedule. I recommend starting with 15, 30, or even 45-minute blocks to avoid becoming overwhelmed. You can always increase that later if it's necessary. Develop a contingency plan for your daily learning. Sometimes life can get in the way in your language learning schedule, and have a plan in place so that if you need to skip a learning session, you can make up that learning time somewhere else in your day. And make sure that even if you do need to skip one day of learning, you never skip 2 days and risk breaking your learning habit. In many ways, systems are more powerful than goals because they keep you focused on the ways in which you are taking action towards your goal and make the overall process of learning easier, smoother, and more habitual. 3. Aim for the Goldilocks zone. When you were a kid, did your parents ever tell you to finish your vegetables? Whether we intend to or not, we often feel like we have to finish the things we start, simply because we've been taught it's the right thing to do. We finish books we do not like, we eat meals we do not enjoy, and we sit through TV series that got stale halfway through, just so we can say we finished what we started. But while that is often a useful rule in daily life, it's not always useful when learning. I can still remember when, a couple of years ago, I was coaching a student who was learning German. Like many of my other students, I had taught him how to apply my bidirectional translation method to the Assimil course books, which typically contain anywhere from 80 to 100 dialogues. Originally, it seemed that his heart was set on applying my method to every lesson of the book from start to finish. Gradually, though, I noticed that his passion for the Assimil lessons began to wane. And one day, during a lesson he had with me, he said, Luca, listen, I love your method and I love Assimil, but I've had enough of these dialogues, and what should I do? And I think he expected me to be upset a little bit or say something along the lines of, just stick with it, just power through until the end and everything will be fine. But actually, I did not. Instead, I told him he could drop Assimil right away and move to another activity and another resource, and it did not have to finish all the lessons of Assimil. So why did I let him stop, even though he technically had a lot, more material that he could cover with Assimil? Because he no longer found it enjoyable or challenging. And enjoyment and challenge should be the two things at the heart of any learning activity you do, and any other learner should do at any level. To maintain motivation while learning a language, you should constantly assess and reassess your learning activities to ensure that you find them fun rather than boring, and find them neither too easy nor too difficult. In other words, you want to make sure that every activity that you do is in the language learning equivalent of the Goldilocks zone. Now, if you remember the tale of Goldilocks and the three bears, you'll understand the concept. Just as Goldilocks did not like her soup to be too cold nor too hot, you do not want your learning activities to fall into the extremes of too easy, too hard, or too boring. Though I'm not sure there's anything wrong with a learning activity that's too fun. Identifying learning activities that fall within the special zone also has a very powerful impact on your motivation as well. Author James Clear noticed that when he wrote, "If you find yourself feeling unmotivated to work on a task, it is often because it has drifted into an area of boredom or been shoved into an area of great difficulty. You need to find a way to pull your tasks back to the border of your abilities where you feel challenged but capable." So that's why I recommend for you here to maintain long-term motivation. You need a plan to consistently keep yourself in the Goldilocks zone. And the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to regularly ask yourself if you find your learning activities fun and challenging. Revise your language learning plan every 3 to 6 months. Establish meaningful relationships. This is something I teased a bit when talking about my personal why, but it's powerful enough that I feel it deserves its own point. To stay motivated over the long term, seek out meaningful relationships with native speakers. Whether you are introverted or extroverted, I think you will agree that human beings are social creatures. We derive much, if not all of our happiness and well-being from engaging with people we care about and who care about us. As beginner language learners, it's easy to feel like there's a wall between you and any native speaker you might connect with. You either feel too inexperienced or too uncomfortable to engage with them. And as a result of this, you retreat into things that feel more comfortable, but that are more difficult to connect with, at a human level at least. Books, videos, apps, and so on. And even if you're stuck in the sit and study stage, I recommend finding ways to build personal connection into your language learning life. You can try things, for example, such as visualizing yourself connecting with native speakers. which I spoke about earlier, or joining online or in-person meetup groups about your target language or culture. You can hire a tutor. You can find a language partner. Even as a beginner, you can find value and connection in all of these things. In my experience, if you're lucky enough to form a strong bond with a native speaker, that bond will act as a powerful motivator that will spur you to get better and better in the language. And on top of that, you'll have a wonderful source of feedback and encouragement. I've developed these connections in nearly every single language I've learned. Through language learning, I've met many incredible people with whom I've shared countless adventures and life-changing experiences. And all of those things together have created a wonderful source of motivation that has kept me learning for decades on end. If you establish meaningful relationships with native speakers and with people in general, I'm certain that you too can develop such an endless source of motivation. And there you go. You now have a powerful set of 4 strategies you can put to use to create and maintain motivation for years and years to come. This makes the end of my 3-part video series of how to start learning any language. First, we covered simple steps for getting started. Then we covered the power of translation, and lastly, we touched upon motivation. If you've watched all 3 videos in the series so far, thank you so much. And if not, be sure to check in the description box for links to the other 2 videos. You will not want to miss those ones. And last but not least, if you've enjoyed what I have shared in the series and would like to dive deeper into my personal methods for learning a language from scratch, then I invite you to check the description box again for a link to my brand new online course, which will provide you with more in-depth strategies for mastering any language. And as always, thanks for watching and happy language learning.